Fhs Season Tickets.
Welcome back to another episode of Fhs Season Tickets. I'm Nick.
And I'm Michael.
And today we're going to be interviewing a special guest here, Ed Feng from
Bleacher Report.
From Bleacher Report.
Yeah,
The analytics. So,
college football.
Yeah, we're really excited. Really covers college football, a hot topic that we've been talking about. And Mike, you got the first question?
Yeah, so we're going to start off. Ed, can you talk about the power rank and data tool that you use?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Power Rank is all about better predictions for college football. And it started out with a better way to do college football rankings. My background is in applied math, and I was able to figure out a way to apply that to ranking college football teams. And essentially all it does, and all any ranking system does, like a Sagarin or anything like that, what it does is it looks at margin of victory in games and adjusts for strength of schedule. And that's it. And what happens is every team comes up with a rating, and the rating is essentially says like if like in Alabama is 20 points, that means Alabama will be expected to beat an average FBS team by about 20 points on a neutral site.
So, how well do you think that you've obviously have gotten data? How well has that data matched up to reality? Like, does analytics? I'm interested. Does analytics usually is more right than wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. So, some numbers. So last year, on my site, so these are the member predictions. They ended up predicting the winner in 76% of college football games last year. So that does not include cupcake FCS games either.
Yeah.
So that's only FBS versus FBS games. So if you're interested in predicting the winner of the game, it's a pretty powerful tool. It's also gamblers are also on my site, so they're interested in predicting against the spread. And so far, our numbers this year have been pretty good, about 53, 54% against the closing spread. Analytics is a really powerful tool. It's not, the predictions aren't perfect by any means.
Right.
And I think all quants need to be very careful about knowing the limitations of their systems. And you can go on my site, you can certainly point at things that may not be right for very good reasons. But I would also argue that in 2016, if you're trying to predict the outcome of games, you can't not look at numbers.
Right.
It's just a tool it's just something that you need to kind of base your opinions off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And can you speak about how you measure turnovers? I want to say that you measure fumbles as just randomness and recovering fumbles. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So fumbles are really tricky. So by basic analysis, turnover margin tends to be random metric to kind of look at teams, especially at this point in the season. This is really kind of a turning point in the season where yards per play is really good at kind of figuring out what teams might be a little undervalued, per se. And actually one of those teams is Michigan State. If you just look at their yards per play numbers, they're 38th in the nation. They don't look like the 38th team in the nation right now when you watch them play, but they're probably not as bad as the final scores in their games have made them out to be.
Nick, you got anything right now?
I'm interested on the analytics. The yards per play. So you're saying that are there those teams that Michigan State's been looking pretty bad recently? Can you think of any other teams that were either severely overrating or underrating? Have you seen anyone that's being overrated right now based on the analytics you've gathered?
I think Nebraska, just because they're 7-0, 8-0.
Yeah.
But that's a team that you can kind of see it just in their final score.
Yeah.
You're always looking at a team that's just squeaking by bad teams. That's never a good sign.
Yeah.
I think they're going to fall off the national radar with games at Wisconsin and at Ohio State the next 2 weeks. I think that's probably my best example. It's pretty good in kind of finding an undefeated team that is overrated at this point in the season. Last year was Utah. They were 6-0, third in the AP poll, and they just They weren't a bad team by any means, and Nebraska's not a bad team by any means either. They're just not a top 10 team.
Speaking on that means, I'm interested, like, which conference usually, like, is more, like, overrated? Like, I always see that, like, the Big 12, especially with, like, Oklahoma State last year, I didn't think was, like, that good. They were, like, undefeated. And Baylor, they always, like, have really good records, but they seem to have had their records, especially, like, this year. So I'm wondering, like, which conference do you see the most more, like, fake numbers as in, like, records? Like, the analytics are pointing more towards them being a worse conference than they're actually being, like, represented based on record.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe let me answer the opposite. A lot of people have been kind of... Essentially, the numbers say the SEC are as good as the perception is.
Yeah.
That we'll see what happens by the end of the season. I'm a little concerned that conference is just firing good coaches left and right, and that's going to really hurt them in the long run. You look at what's happened to Georgia. LSU's playing all right now, but that's because Les Miles built a good football before the end. Conference is not necessarily like the whole conference being under or overrated. Like, I feel like the Big 12 has been pretty fairly rated. Oklahoma was very good last year. Oklahoma's still probably the best conference in the best team in the conference this year. But like in other conferences, like the ACC, like the numbers really see the huge gap between the top and the rest of the conference. So last year was definitely Clemson and Florida State. This year is Clemson, Florida State, and Louisville. And you really see that in my playoff odds on Bleacher Report, because Clemson and Louisville both have really good odds to make the playoffs. And that's not necessarily that they're better than Alabama or Ohio State. It's because they're not really playing anyone in conference the rest of the season. I mean, obviously playing Florida State's tough. But, when you go down to the Boston Colleges and Syracuse's, the competition's not stiff. And you're seeing win probabilities in the 90s. And it's... I think the Pac-12 is really bad.
Yeah. This year
for sure.
Numbers are showing.
Yeah, I can't believe
you mentioned that the Pac-12 you thought was really down this year, Nick.
No, their top team historically, or like at least in the past 4 or 5 years, is Stanford, and they're not even ranked anymore. USC, I just don't understand it either because there's so much talent. I'm not sure if you could even judge this by what you do with analytics, but I feel like what really affects college football the most, which may be obvious to people, is recruiting and how well you recruit, how consistently you recruit, and like if you hit on your players. And you would think that in the West Shore, that you would have, especially like California states like California, you would have like the best recruits, and it just doesn't seem like the Pac-12 really does that. I mean, they do in a sense, USC, but maybe it's development-wise. But yeah, I was just really disappointed with the Pac-12 this year. Oregon's really down, Stanford's down for their standards, USC's down, just everyone. So yeah, I just think Pac-12 definitely is the worst. Can you even judge like who you think is going to be like bad, like maybe next year? Like, does that help at all? Like looking to the future, like looking at the numbers now, or have you like not thought of it that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one thing about college football is that preseason rankings are easy. Well, they're not easy, but they're easy compared to the NFL. Because in college, you can actually really kind of lean on the last couple of years of what happened. And it's going to be bad for the Pac-12 next year. I'm a Stanford alum, been a Stanford fan, and I've actually really never liked David Shaw as a coach.
Oh, really? That's interesting.
Well, if you watch his games, like the in-game decision making, like punting on the opponent's 32. There's so many things in games that are really frustrating. But he's won a lot of football games.
Yeah.
But you gotta ask the question: did he have a really good run of developing players? Christian McCaffrey. Kevin Hogan was such an underrated quarterback on that program for a long time.
Yeah.
So, you got to ask the question, and this is something I've been thinking about a lot recently. Teams go through periods where they develop a lot of players. So they hit on a lot of players. So you just have to look at Michigan State over the last 4 years. They developed. I mean, Connor Cook wasn't even recruited, I don't think. He was either like a 2-star or no star. Jack Conklin goes from offensive tackle that was barely recruited to first round NFL draft pick. They had 2 cornerbacks that went in the first round of the NFL draft pick.
Yeah.
It kind of looks like they can't sustain that. Stanford might be another example. I think Boise State about 4 or 5 years ago was another example of a team that just had, this variance in talent that worked itself out, and that's kind of going away. And then now getting back to your Pac-12 question, you can see the numbers, right? USC hasn't really been good over the last couple of years. They've kind of played all right the last couple of weeks, but I still think they made a really lazy hire with Clay Helton. I'd be interested to see how long he lasts there. But when you're USC, you don't need to go after an untested head coach like that.
I feel
you
like
can go out and hire a big name.
I feel like that's kind of the stigma of USC being able to get anyone they want is really just
not anymore.
Not anymore. It's still around, but there's not that many sexy hires anymore in college football. The one last year was Kirby Smart, Mark Richt. They each had Kirby Smart obviously wanted to stay in the SEC. That's where he's been successful, and Mark Richt had his alum was Miami. So I feel like that stigma that USC can really get whoever they want has been proven false the past couple hires they have. I think they had to stick.
Sarkisian was a bad hire as well.
Yeah. Sarkisian was, I don't know, that was a different story with, he got himself into trouble really with the alcoholism. But anyways, I think that for sure.
But they didn't look last year. That's my thing.
Yeah.
Right? Did they look that hard beyond Helton? I don't think they did.
Helton was the interim coach, right?
Yeah,
I think they just didn't
interim.
want to do the same thing that they did with Orgeron. They let him go. There was a big fiasco. Then they brought in Sarkisian. I don't know. I feel like there's stuff behind the scenes that we're not seeing yet. They weren't really looking, that's true, but who else could they have really gotten? That's the thing.
Tom Herman?
Apparently,
he's a Southern California guy, so.
I don't know if you go after Tom Herman
despite
after
their
1
struggles,
year.
I still think he's a pretty decent coach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too, but I don't know after 1 year you instantly make that hire. But speaking of David Shaw, one of his assistants, Derek Mason, is the head coach of my favorite team, Vanderbilt, and he's made some interesting decisions. I know you work on analytics for the teams, but what do the analytics tell you for 4th down and 3 at your 20-yard line or at your 50-yard line? Is it better to punt? Is it better to go for it? How is that working in?
Yeah, so 4th down decision making is something that Brian Burke did a lot of really nice work on, and he's at ESPN now. So none of this is my work, but there's a really interesting result in the NFL. So if you have kind of an average offense versus an average defense, analytics says that you should go for on 4th and 2 or less anywhere on the field. So whether that's on your own 10-yard line,
really?
Your own 15.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So you all remember the Belichick Patriots versus Colts where he went for it on 4th and 2 from his own I forget what it was, his
30.
own 30.
Yeah, around there.
That was the right call by the numbers.
But how much data is there that really how many people have actually gone at 4th and 2 at their own maybe 5-yard line? How much data do you actually have that people go for it? Could that just be
no one does.
The lucky couldn't those numbers just be the lucky few that happened and that's skewing your data or
maybe that close to your goal line, but not at your 30.
No, yeah, okay.
So there's plenty of data
That's
at your
fair.
30, and then you're still getting a very counterintuitive result that you should go for it 4th and 2 from your own 30. I don't know. I feel like a couple years ago, head coaches were really kind of going for it on 4th down. And I don't really see a lot of that.
No, people are
Belichick
playing
was supposed to be a
conservative.
leader, and he stopped doing it. I don't know. Pete Carroll did it in college. Doesn't seem to be doing it at Seattle.
I think people are
they
playing
got
for
some
their
issues.
jobs more. I think that may be due to there's been more quick fires. People are more playing for their jobs, both in the NFL and college football. They don't want to be too Les Miles. You just saw the most aggressive. I feel head coach
Fake field goal king.
Football. Yeah, in college football, just get fired. But in Les Miles, that could just be a trend that's happening right now in football. I don't know. College football and the NFL usually don't take trends from each other, but that could be why what you're seeing in both NFL and college football.
But, I would also argue if you're coaching for your job, you need to take those quote-unquote risks, right? That's what Ron Rivera did at Carolina. And now that he's a Super Bowl team, he stopped doing that.
Yeah.
And honestly, I've actually talked to some psychologists about this. It doesn't make sense that there isn't at least some FCS coach just not punting. or I mean, essentially not punting.
Yeah, I know what
You know,
you mean.
you should punt if it's
Take
4th
some
and 20
risks,
on your
yeah.
own 5. Like, analytics has no problem with
Okay,
that.
okay.
But
I thought you said
like
he should
those
not
guys have
punt.
a lot. Those guys have a lot to gain and a very little to lose.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Well, relatively, yeah.
Well, there was
Relatively. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
just the thing on Bleacher Report. Their first ever high school game they broadcasted included the quotation that Bleacher Report used: "the high school coach that never punts." And
yeah,
apparently,
Kevin Pulaski Academy. Kevin, whatever his name is. Yeah, he's a good. He's an interesting dude. I've met him at the Sloan conference, and he's an innovator. He's an innovator. So they broadcast that game.
yeah, it was live on Bleacher Report. I hopped in for like 2-3 minutes and then didn't really care anymore. But like, it was still kind of cool to see. Yeah.
Yeah, any onside kicks every time too.
Yep.
Onside kicks
cool.
every time.
And goes
Every
for
time.
it. And goes for it unless
Does he have,
it's
like, a really
basically
good defense,
if it's 4th and 20 or less, he basically goes for it.
What's his
pretty
record?
much.
Yeah. Okay. So
What's
that's
his-
where like Kevin Kelly. That's where he goes a little bit crazy.
Yes.
Because you just punt when it's 4th and 20 on
Yeah.
your own 5. Like
Yeah. Wait, what's his record?
I want to say they were 6-1 at the time of the game.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so it's interesting to think like he is at academy, he can recruit. So how much of that is his
Just
talent?
the talent, yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think you would be doing that if you didn't have that much talent. Like,
No.
I can't see you going an onside kick every time without at least a decent defense.
Yeah. And speaking
Right.
of recruiting, how do you factor recruiting into like your preseason data? Do you use that very often?
Yeah. So right now I don't. I'm gonna go look at it in February. I'm gonna take a serious look at it. I mean, what I've found is that recruiting doesn't really correlate well with how a team performs on the field in general. And this is only looking at Power 5 conferences
Really?
because
That's interesting.
recruiting rankings for like Group of 5. I mean, there's just nothing that differentiates.
You mean
them
like the
in a sense.
previous year recruiting ranking, like as in freshmen don't impact, or are you talking about like 3 years, like so?
Yeah, no,
Like,
I'm
no
saying
recent
like
recruit-
look at 4 years worth of recruiting data and look at how well that predicts like the next year of how
Oh.
a college football team
Yeah.
does, and it's not very strong.
That's
Um,
interesting.
For example, like if you just took the year-end rating from my numbers from the previous season, that would be a better predictor of the year-end rating the next year than
Yeah.
4 years of recruiting
Wow.
data.
That's
Well, I guess you
surprising.
see. Well, if you think like USC is an outlier there, like they
Yeah,
don't do
exactly.
as well for how
Notre
much
Dame.
as they recruit. Well, yeah, this year I guess.
Well, no. Well,
This year.
Notre Dame last year actually played up to the recruiting level. And
Yeah.
it was nice to see.
And the
then
injuries.
I don't know what's going on this year.
This
You
year
probably
just
know better than I do.
yeah. I've talked about it way too much on this show. I think we're just gonna take the loss this year
Yeah.
and just we'll try to rebuild. I have so much to talk about with the Brian Kelly thing. I don't think we should fire him, but that's for another day.
Right.
I really
Nick,
think
do
we
you
should.
have, do you have one last thing before I go into my betting picks with him?
Oh yeah, he's a better.
So Nick, if you have one last question
Nice.
before
Yeah.
I ask that.
No, I think I'm good. You can get into
Oh,
it.
actually, let me just finish up about the recruiting thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But I mean, it doesn't really correlate well. But you know what? Like, I actually haven't checked because when I do these recruiting rankings, it actually gives me a rating just like my team rankings. And what I haven't done is check how well that predicts the outcome of games.
Yeah.
So in some cases, that's actually a decent predictor. I'll throw it in my preseason model last year, but it's just work I haven't done yet.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool. I'll be excited to that. As you
Yeah,
know, I
for
subscribe
sure.
to the Power Rank, so I get all the emails. But now I'm gonna ask you about my predictions. What do you think about them? The first prediction, I'm only gonna ask you about the spread. Don't worry about the over/unders. First
Okay.
one I took last night was App State -4. That obviously did great. App State won by like 17. Next one,
Yep.
I got San Diego State -3. Do you have any thoughts about that?
San Diego State. Let me take a look real quick here.
Okay. They're at someone not very good.
Yeah, well, Utah State's not terrible, and I have. Yeah, so I have San Diego State winning by 3. So not a ton of value there.
So that line is about even. I got Houston.
Yeah,
I got Houston
I
minus.
think it opened San Diego State by 6. So if it's back at 3, then the market moved kind of in the direction of where I thought it would.
Now my lines are going to be a little bit skewed because I use all my lines from oddshark.com, and they show me like 8 casinos, and I actually bet real money. So I just take the line that's best for me. So most of the San Diego State lines were -5, but one outlier was -3. So like I kind of cheat by putting the -3 line because it's best for me.
Hey, that sounds good to me, man.
But then I got Houston -9, Oklahoma State +4, and Purdue +11.5. Any ones you really like or don't like?
So Houston, I think their entire offensive line is hurt. I think that's why they lost to SMU last week, because the offense couldn't do anything. And you look at the injury report, and like all the projected starters, like 4 of the projected starters are questionable for the game, and that's never a good thing. Like that's actually a game I looked at this week, and just couldn't pull the trigger on it when you know the basis of your offense. Let's take a look. What was the other one?
Oklahoma State +4 at home against West Virginia.
Yeah, so this is a really interesting game. So I have West Virginia by 1, which suggests that Oklahoma State +4. I think that's right. But the problem with, I guess my numbers in particular, is that they don't react fast to teams that are either going up or down. So, for example, Michigan State's going down. West Virginia is going, I mean, they actually have a defense in the Big 12, which is kind of a shocking thing in and of itself. So, there's a lot of examples. Like Auburn's another example where, I have Ole Miss winning just because, like, the system doesn't kind of catch up enough. It's a slow-moving system, and that ends up making for better predictions. But there are certainly outliers of teams that are just drastically different this season than they were before. And West Virginia might be one of those teams.
I actually did take Auburn -2, 2.5. And then I got some other interesting ones. I took Ohio State -23 before the line moved up to 27. What are your thoughts about the Buckeyes? How did they bounce back? I know you have them really high in your playoff odds too.
Yeah, I think 27 is a pretty big. What'd you get it at?
23.
23. Yeah, I mean, I'd be okay with that. I mean, they're clearly a better team than Northwestern. My thing about Northwestern is, like, they don't have a ton of talent, but their defense was, I mean, off the charts for what you would expect from Northwestern last year. And it's still been pretty good this season. So, when you're starting to look at 18 games and a unit's been pretty good, they might actually be pretty good. And so that's the only thing that kind of gives me a little bit of pause in that game. And also Ohio State's offense has really kind of underperformed for a couple weeks in a row, too. So, if I had to pick between those two units, I would pick Ohio State and for them to cover. But that's not where my math falls. But I can certainly see them covering that game.
Yeah, and I know you have their playoff odds very high. That's something that I've been trying to explain to Ohio State fans, that the loss to Penn State did not ruin their playoff odds.
No, I don't think it. Here's the only sense in which it mattered. Like, both Ohio State and Michigan could have gone into that game undefeated.
Yeah.
And the loser had a chance at making the playoff. So there's no, depending on how things break down championship weekend.
That's interesting.
But now Ohio State doesn't have that possibility, right? Like, they can't lose. They can't lose to Michigan. But they control their own destiny in the sense that if they continue to win, they're going to win the national championship, and that's the huge difference from the BCS era.
So if Ohio State if Michigan lost to Ohio State, do you think Michigan still has a chance to sneak in or no?
I do.
Really?
Right? I mean, because you just have to look
a one
at
loss Ohio State team.
Yeah, I mean, I think they
the
can
Big
both
Ten?
make it, right?
Really?
I presume Ohio State beats Wisconsin. Michigan drops to 4th or 5th in a very close game. So say like Ohio State kicks a field goal, beats them.
You would have to say Clemson drops a game, right? You would have to say.
Yeah, exactly. So you would need stuff like Clemson to lose, and they might not drop out, but if either Alabama or Washington lose in that championship game, I mean, Michigan's next in line to get right back up there.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I think
so.
That would be cool to see Ohio State and Michigan the same, even though I hate Michigan.
Yeah.
But I think he's a Michigan.
So that's the thing that you got to remember.
From Ann Arbor.
Like we haven't seen colossal upsets. Conference favorites have won in the big conferences, and those teams have ended up making the playoff. But that's not going to happen every year. So, one of these years we're going to see how, what happens if the top-ranked team in the nation loses in the conference championship game.
Yeah, that would be interesting. I agree with you. I think an 11-1 Michigan's better than a 12-1 Washington at this point in the season.
Exactly, not
Right.
12 is down.
Yeah, and then the just two notable picks. I got a couple more. I took Utah
Sure.
plus 11.5 and Florida State plus 4. Any thoughts
Yeah.
on those?
Yeah, which Florida State defense is going to show up? Because if the bad Florida State defense shows up, I like the
Clemson's
over
gonna
and
rout
Clemson in that game.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no lack of talent on Florida State's defense, but they just, I don't know. There's just they pick 6 games out of every 3 years where they just completely fail to show up. So I find that a tough one. Utah and Oregon.
No, Utah, Washington.
Utah, Washington State. Utah, Washington, right?
Yeah, I took Utah plus 11.
I thought Washington was overrated this preseason. I've been dead wrong.
I was dead wrong too. I took them under 9 in the season win total, so I'm taking that L.
me too. That's looking awful right now.
Yeah.
And the thing is, their offense has been really good after being very mediocre last year, and the defense has been, as expected, very good. So, and Utah is a really interesting team because there's a team where I expected the defense to be very good. And they've been terrible, and the offense just put up 45 on a good UCLA defense.
What?
And so I don't really know what to make of Utah right now. Definitely a very solid program. Kind of a program you expect to be somewhere between 25 and 35 every year. But I don't know. I'm just having a hard time going against Washington right now.
Do you think Utah's coach is someone I haven't heard in any coaching hires? Do you think he could? LSU would maybe sneak him in, or no?
LSU wants
I
a
don't
sexy
know.
hire.
You just don't hear people talking about it, right? And he's a really good coach, but if you're LSU, you want to win a national title.
If you're LSU, you want a big name, or you stick with Ed Orgeron, I would think.
But he's
with how
not a
he's
big
doing.
name.
You want a big name, or you stick with him. You don't hire the Utah head coach. That's my
Right.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
LSU will fall out of being a top 10 team if they keep Orgeron. That is my prediction. I don't think Orgeron can sustain Les Miles' level of success. And you can argue whether they've been a top 10 team over the last couple years.
Yeah, I don't think with Les Miles they're a top 10 team. I think that the only reason why Les Miles is doing good is because he's in the SEC and a recruiting hotbed in Louisiana. I think Ed
I get
Orgeron
that.
would hype these players up and actually make them want to play for him, other than Les Miles, who's just stuck in his ways, too stubborn, doesn't want to change at all. But I agree that Orgeron should not be the head coach next year if you're LSU, because you're a huge, massive program. But
All right, I will choose to agree with you on that point. And
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know. I was against firing Miles. If you want to get rid of him, fine. Find a way to get rid of him. Allow him to resign. Honor the man for winning a BCS title and making another BCS game and winning.
they honored him by keeping him last year. I don't know. He's just this man. He could not.
I know. I'm
They're
definitely
doing
the
10
minority.
times better now, without him. They're doing way
But
better
he-
without him with Ed Orgeron.
But he built that team, right? It's not like that's his team. He built that defense. He's always had great defenses, and obviously,
Yeah.
yes, I agree. He's a little bit stubborn. He's never been able to develop a quarterback.
Yeah, I don't.
Probably should have gotten a different offensive coordinator. But I just think you're asking for trouble when you fire someone who has such a track record of success at a school. You look at what Tennessee did with Phil Fulmer back in the day. I just think it's disrespectful, and I think it's just kind of bad karma. I think George is going through the same thing right now. Man, they're bad. I don't know what's wrong. I don't
They
know
just
what's wrong with
fired.
that team.
They hired another Mark Richt. I couldn't understand that, but I do
a
think
worse Mark Richt.
Yeah, I don't know right now, but I think the LSU thing. last thing I'm gonna say on it, like I think that they just want it's like championship or bust when you're there at LSU, and I don't think they ever saw Les Miles getting that done. I mean, yeah, he would be a great defensive coordinator. I don't think he built like that stellar of a team. You're in the SEC, you're gonna get great defensive recruits. He could never develop a quarterback. He had Odell Beckham Jr., Jarvis Landry, and Zach Mettenberger.
And
couldn't do anything.
Offense.
And didn't have a good offense. I think that's just what you look at on the offensive side of the ball. You need to do that against these SEC teams. But Mike, did you need to say anything else, or
you're in the majority, man. You are absolutely in the majority of that opinion.
Yeah, you're the total opposite to another person we got on the show, Barrett Sully. I'm sure you know him. He was very anti-Les Miles when we interviewed him before Les Miles was fired, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was calling for Les Miles to get fired, and then he did get fired like 2 weeks after that interview. So interesting to hear two different perspectives.
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way, though, right? Like, they didn't lose to Wisconsin by much, and Wisconsin turned out to be a pretty good team. And, they're like 1 second away from beating Auburn of the snap of that football.
Yep.
So, and that's their only 2 losses, right?
Yep. Somebody said Les Miles got fired for losing 2 quote-unquote road games, because LSU is basically a road game, to top 10 teams by a combined 7 points.
Exactly.
Auburn's a top 10 team now.
I think Auburn's top 10 team.
Auburn's looking like a top 10 team. And that...
He disagrees with me, but I was all over them 2 weeks ago.
Hey, I'm not too disagreeing with you. Oh, yeah, you were over them 2 weeks ago.
I was all over them 2 weeks ago, saying how underrated they were, and they backed me up.
Hey, good job. My buddy Mike, that I do some stuff with on the site, has liked Auburn all year, too.
Yeah.
And I've been disagreeing, but looks like I've been wrong.
Okay, well, I think that'll wrap it up. Yep.
Yeah, I think we're good. Thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, where are you guys?
We're in Cleveland, Ohio.
Cleveland?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. So you guys got a lot of stuff going on there right now, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
It's the epicenter of sports.
The Browns.
Yeah, you got the Browns.
Hey,
my buddy,
we'll take Wood, yeah.
My buddy's the assistant head coach there. So bad for him.
Oh, really?
Pep Hamilton.
Who?
Pep Hamilton, like assistant head coach, quarterbacks coach. I don't know if he's the coordinator.
I think I've heard the name. I can't place him though.
No.
But yeah.
Yeah, they're kind of a mess. Although you're starting my boy Kevin Hogan.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, your guy.
I actually I don't know how, I didn't know he was on the Browns roster, but I was praising how good he was at Stanford like 3 weeks ago, and I thought he was a major reason why Stanford fell off.
No, he was definitely a good reason. I forget the quarterback before. Well, Notre Dame plays Stanford every year, and I forget the quarterback before him, but he came in. The year he came in, they started winning. I think they beat Notre Dame that year, but for sure he was good at Stanford. But again, Cleveland, the epicenter of the sports world right now, and we're soaking it in. But you're from Ann Arbor, right?
Yep.
That's a rivalry. OSU
We got
versus Michigan.
there's a lot of high tension in this town this week. So.
Oh really? For what? From
Well,
what?
Michigan State.
Michigan State,
Oh,
because
yeah,
they haven't
you're right.
beaten them in so long.
Oh yeah.
Well,
Well,
attention
I think
in
that's
the
gonna come to an end.
Yeah,
I think
I
that
agree.
streak's gonna come to an end. But
Yeah.
really good talking to you. Thanks
Yeah,
for coming
so
on the show.
can you-
What?
Wait, can you guys tell me your names just so I know for next time?
Oh yeah, my bad. I'm Nick, and that's
Nick?
Michael.
And I'm Michael,
Yeah.
the one who emailed you.
Michael, thanks for reaching out. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, take care, guys.
See ya,
Yep,
everyone.
you too. Thank you.
He said, just so I know for next time, we're in.